Good afternoon. Thanks for coming. Still. I'm Jonathan Rochelle, and I'm one of the co-founders of the suite of products that you now know as Docs and Drive. Hopefully you know. How many people here use Google Docs or Drive or Sheets? Yes. Yes. Cool. So that journey started for me 11 years ago, actually. When I joined Google with three engineers, we ended up with 4 engineers, starting with Google Sheets, and we grew those products into a suite of tools, as you know now as Google Docs, but it was Sheets and Slides and Forms and AppScript and fonts and many other products. Hundreds of millions of people every month use those products. And I'm really proud of that fact. But what I'm more proud of is what happened with those products with educators and students. And over time, we offered those products the same way we sell those products to businesses as a suite of tools with a control panel and all kinds of corporate controls. We offered it to educators for free. I just realized I don't have my clicker. Thank you. And those products were great, but we realized that we weren't really solving the problems in education in the classroom. We just gave a basic suite of tools. So I'm more proud of the fact that we decided to engage and invest about 3 years ago in things like Google Classroom and Google Expeditions. And that's the team I run now, is Google Apps for Education. One area that we've pursued is to improve student engagement. And so you might see this quote sometimes from people. Before anybody tweets this, I just want to make it really clear, I never said this quote. Somebody did, though, and I've seen them say it. It's not technology. Right? I would never say that quote. It's not the technology that makes it engaging. It's what you do with the technology. The tool could be great, but a tool is a tool. Without an educator that has a learning objective, without a student that has a learning objective to apply that tool. So I'm not going to ever say that quote. That's not something that you'll hear from somebody at Google, and if you do, please report them to authorities. This is very important to us, that there's no expectation that we're about the shiny object. But I want to tell you a story about student engagement. This is two fifth grade girls in Bronx Community Charter School in New York City, Alma and Julia. And Alma and Julia are motivated students, but they've got a teacher that helps to push them, a motivated teacher named Christy Crawford. And Christy helped them with a project that they were working on. They were working on sustainability. And they were intrigued by recycling, so they wanted to talk about recycling. So they were working on the sustainability unit and basically trying to figure out what angle they should take. And they realized that their school was producing mounds of garbage. 6 bags, 25 pounds each, every single day. And when they started digging in, quite literally, into the garbage to figure out what was there was so much that could have been recycled and so much that was not recycled. So many things that they could do, and they were motivated to do something about it. So they literally started counting sporks. Do you know what a spork is? It's a spoon, it's a fork, it does everything. It's not a knife, though. But they noticed these sporks were actually all in the garbage, still wrapped up. The kids were just dumping them out. There was a recycle bin right next to it, but they didn't know what to do, and they didn't care. So the kids digging through the garbage every day, these 2 girls, piling up the sporks, trying to figure out what they could recycle, and thinking about how they're going to report it, and trying to get the kids in the 5th grade to do something, to actually change the way they acted. And do you think the other 5th graders were empathetic, sympathetic? Not at all, right? They were just clowning them. Look at the garbage pickers. Now they're starting to throw stuff in just because they could and clown them. So they thought, how could we compel kids to start recycling? And of course, their teacher's always behind them, encouraging, saying, don't give up, it's okay, this is something that's worth pursuing. They thought, well, maybe a visit to the garbage dump, a visit to the recycling plant would be amazing. Let's get all the kids, 400 5th graders, to the recycling plant. What a great idea. And show them what's going on, and show them why it's so important. And if they could see the journey of a piece of garbage, track 1 spork, and show the journey of that thing, that would compel them. And so a field trip sounded like an awesome idea. And of course, Mrs. Crawford is behind them sort of saying, yeah, look into it, figure it out. Can you do it? Can we do a field trip for 400 kids to the recycling plant? And of course, they find out, it's going to cost 400 quid, to get a bus. And now how many buses would it take? Could they actually spend a whole school day on the bus? Could they get parents' permission? Would it be safe? It's a hard hat place, actually, the recycling plant. Could you do that for 400 students? And it seemed impractical. But these kids were engaged. And Mrs. Crawford was the one engaging them and helping them along that path. And so I want to, they had a supportive teacher, but I want to stop that story for a minute to talk about what is it that makes engagement. And this is so important for schools and teachers, but it's also so important for people in ed tech. Because it's not just that shiny object. It's not throwing technology at someone and saying, this is going to fix everything. Kids are going to be so engaged. My kids are engaged sometimes with Flappy Bird. I don't think they're learning anything. So it's really important. I have 3 kids, and I know what it's like on the weekend to engage them. A teacher has 30, 50, 150, maybe 400 students. It's a really hard job to engage, and technology can sometimes help, but it's not the magic that you need only. You need the teacher. So I'm going to talk about those 7 elements of engagement, and let's start with this one. Start with the rockets, with the volcano, with the explosion, something that's going to get them interested right away. And so my 13-year-old comes home and I thought, had this amazing lesson. And I'm like, how was school? And I knew they were doing this lesson. He's like, it was all right. I'm like, what about that? I thought you were doing the catapults. And I think it was the catapults. I don't remember if it was. But it was something in physics that sounded amazing. And he's like, yeah, I thought it was going to be great too, but we had 40 minutes of lecture and note-taking and then 5 minutes of catapult. And I would just say, if they turned it around, I still wouldn't want 40 minutes of lecture, but turn it around, start with the catapult. Get them engaged, get them interested. I remember I had a 9th grade physics teacher. First thing he did when we got into class, the first day of school, he had one of these massive beakers of water, and he's talking to the class saying, does anybody eat salt here? Of course you do. Sodium chloride, that's great. And he's, in the meantime, cutting something. What I've got here is something actually that's half of salt. It's sodium. It's not salt, it's just sodium. And as he's talking, he's cutting it, and he cuts a teeny little piece. He's like, I just want to show you something. And he steps back and tosses the sodium into the water. And it's supposed to just fizzle and then go, psh, a little bit of water. The beaker explodes, the water all over the desk, all over the front row of kids. And he's like apologizing. But meanwhile, I will never forget that moment. I'll never forget it. It'll be the most amazing moment of probably my whole high school time, unfortunately. That's sad, but true. But I would say start with that explosion. Do something that's amazing. Get the kids interested. It's hard to engage kids, especially now. They've got so much going on. Second, I would say, is discovery. This is exploration. Giving unknowns is more important than giving knowns. Don't give them all the answers. Give them open fields. And NASA's like this, I guess, an icon of exploration, of course. But it's the kind of things that kids really love, is open spaces, gaps in the learning, gaps in the information that they can actually discover. Super important. Taking the creativity out and just giving them all the information, that's not what it's about if you're going to try to engage them. And engaging them will teach them. Next is interaction, giving kids the ability to actually act and do things, and do it together, do it with other kids. Using experience, like getting in there and actually doing it, and making sure that they know how to interact and communicate. It really helps, and it engages them. And it's different than shared experience, but important also. Shared experience means that they can give each other feedback, that they can relate to one another when they do what's really important, which is reflection. You get back to the class after doing something and you can reflect, hey, what was this all about? And one kid experiencing it one way and another kid experiencing this a different way shows something when it was the same experience, but that it was perceived in 2 different ways. And so we're doing that with other people as well, super important. Having a purpose is engaging. Doing something because you need to achieve some goal. And it makes some of the usually unbearable small tasks of learning bearable because you're doing that to achieve something bigger. And so it's something that really gives people a sense of longer-term ownership of something that sometimes is not that obvious when you're just reading a book or doing an assessment after trying to comprehend a paragraph of information. And this is the reason why PBL, project-based learning, is so compelling. Why people love it so much, because it's much more of a long task with multiple steps that leads to some purpose. There's an achievement at the end, something that they have a goal. And then making it relevant, of course. And some of these seem obvious, but when you put them all together, they engage students. And it's hard to do every day. It's one of the hardest tasks I think a teacher has. But it's engaging when it can be something that's interesting. And now students' interests in a class are not all the same. That's one of the things that makes it so hard. That's where I would say there's a role for technology, probably because it's just so hard to manage when you have a class of 30 or 50 or 150, that you're trying to make engaging for everyone. So you don't want to do something necessarily that's engaging for some, but other kids will be like, well, it doesn't really interest me. It's not relevant to me. You want to make it relevant to all. And that's something that becomes so much more important when you have a diverse set of people in your class. And challenge is probably one of the things that I think we do, I would say, as parents particularly. And I kind of stand here in three roles. Of course, I talk to you as a product manager at Google. It's something that I have experience creating products and ed tech products, but I'm also the parent, and I have so much of that in me when I create products. And in fact, I'm also on the school board in my local public school, and so I have that perspective. On our team, the Google Classroom team and the Google Apps for Education team, I would say 70 to 90% of the engineers, the product managers, the designers are ex-educators or in some way involved in education before they're doing what they're doing today, or still involved. Many adjunct professors that are working as engineers and designers, we're trying to live it. But we know we have to get in there and actually let teachers partly run what we do. It's the educators that are defining this. And I would say what I hear the most is providing challenge to students is the hardest, and parents sometimes ruin it because they too quickly help the child. They jump in too fast. It's important to give feedback really fast, but you don't want to solve it. I have such a hard time with this as a parent. I see my child suffering doing the stupidest thing, like opening a Reese's peanut butter cup, and I want to step in and be like, oh, I got that. What am I doing? Stop. I think my kid can handle opening a Reese's peanut butter cup. I think they can handle building the rocket. I think they can actually handle curing a disease. It's amazing. I know a teacher that actually, first-year teacher, she teaches 4 to 5-year-olds. It's transitional kindergarten, it's called. Christine Pinto is her name. And she is letting her and motivating her 4 and 5-year-olds to use spreadsheets. And everybody looks at her like she's crazy until they watch them do it and be like, wow, I can't even do that. And these 4 and 5-year-olds are doing it. They can do more than we think, and giving them a challenge is actually helpful. So those are the 7 elements. I want to talk about what happens now on something that we know of as very engaging, field trips. So besides the sodium blowing up the first day of physics, field trips I really remember. I was engaged. And so the options that you've got for field trips, though, are somewhat limited. You typically have to get on one of these important technology, the bus, the school bus, and go somewhere, and it's really hard. It's like what Julia and Emma experienced trying to get people on a bus. It's really hard. And it's not practical, and it's expensive, and you can only do it a few times, and you're geographically limited. And there's sometimes these overnight trips that kids take when they get to the higher grades, and those are incredibly hard to manage, especially since then they're teenagers, and the problems that they face are even bigger. But it's kind of this one-dimensional thing that you can really, it's totally limited what you can do. But what if we could actually try to repeat that experience? What if we took the most advanced virtual reality equipment to the most incredible places and captured those experiences to the closest possible physical feeling of being there? And what if we use the power of the technology, not just in the camera and capturing the images, but then the technology it takes to create virtual reality, now that the technology is there, so that a teacher could use those capabilities to bring kids places more often, maybe even every day. So instead of the bus, just bring the camera with a photographer. Get the footage, get the experience, and then present it in a more realistic way. And what if we then gave teachers the library of experiences and put it in their hands so that they could create lessons out of it? And it's not about the trip anymore. It's about the experience and the learning objective. And now you could take that experience and fit it into a learning objective. So we've done this in Google Expeditions, and Google Expeditions has more than 200 destinations now, and some of which, even if you had 400 quid, you couldn't get to, right? Mars, outer space. You're not taking a bus to outer space. Underwater. And so when a teacher, I just want to give you a feeling for what that experience is like. When a teacher chooses one of those experiences, this is what they're shown. They're shown the different places that you could take them there. And the teacher can select it, and it feels like an authentic visit, but it's just like a field trip in some ways, because it's the kids, like they got off the bus, can look around. But the teacher has some control, but not complete control. And the teacher also is backed by experts. There's information. There's an information panel that comes out that, if the teacher needs it, helps with points of interest, with facts, with information, things that help her, him, guide the class in this place towards that learning objective. And we've seen one expedition, the Great Wall of China is a great example, used in history, in math, in physics, in all kinds of ways, the same content, but fit into different learning objectives. So that's the teacher's guide, and it's annotated and got preset points of interest. And the students use Google Cardboard. And Google Cardboard is just this thing that you might have heard of. How many people have tried Google Cardboard? A whole bunch of people. That's great. And that was the goal. Google Cardboard was meant to make virtual reality accessible to anyone, if you have a smartphone. And that's still a limiter, but most people have smartphones now. Well, most people here anyway. So this was something that started out of our Paris office. The Cultural Institute and my team got together and said, how can we put this to use in education? And that's where Google Expeditions came from. It's cheap, but it's effective, and it puts the power of VR into the hands of educators and students. So the students use this. And by the way, you need to remove the friction, too. What if we could remove all the friction around typical products like this and say you don't even need internet access? We have a Wi-Fi system that allows the teacher from their tablet, where they're picking the destination, to communicate to these. But what if you didn't need internet access? So we did that. And what if you didn't need to log in? So we did that to remove the friction. And so last fall, we launched Expeditions through a pioneer program where we took it to schools. And more than 1 million children have experienced Google Expeditions. It's probably the largest educational VR deployment so far. And the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive. So the teacher takes them there, the students put it up to their face, and immediately it's like, wow. It's amazing. And you see kids, sometimes they take it back away from their face. It's like, where are we? Oh my gosh, this is amazing. And they're looking around, and they're seeing whatever that scene is. And the teacher can see where they're looking on the tablet. And it's an incredible experience. Even if you do it for 5 minutes in a lesson, it changes the engagement. It's got some of those elements, not all of them, but some of those elements. And the shared experience is there. And that's one of the things we were trying to do, is bring VR, instead of a personal experience where you're strapping this on to your head and you're kind of not walking because you'll probably fall off the stage, or wherever you're standing, that's dangerous. There's always something if you're not seeing. And so we tried to make it a shared experience, and that was super important to us. And this is what the child sees, the student. Of course, it doesn't really, you don't want to experience it like that, but when you see it in here, you really feel like you're there. And the teacher can guide. You can see the guide showing the student, no, look over there, the diver is over there, and the teacher can change those points of interest. And it really changes the engagement. And the experience we had in the first few classrooms that we were launching this in immediately showed the positive angle to it, and that just continued through the 1 million students. Almost zero negative feedback. And so this is just a famous quote, which I would support, from Seymour Papert. And this is explaining the role of the teacher. And it brings me back to Christy Crawford. The teacher is creating an environment for invention and discovery and engagement. It's not the teacher just talking. So if we look back at what happened with Julia and Amma, they basically decided we should do something about this, and they decided to write a letter to Google to say, hey, we heard about this virtual reality thing. What if you guys did a virtual reality tour of the recycle plant? And you guys brought it to our school or gave it to us so we could let the 400 fifth graders do this recycle plant thing. And here's why. Here's what we're trying to achieve. And they were able to do that. And we did. They took the jump cam to the recycle plant. We had Julia and Amma there with their hard hats on. We did the story, and we brought it to the school, and they had a big assembly for 400 fifth graders. And it was amazing. And Julia and Amma, I mean, they became heroes. They were on TV. This is just a clip from the TV footage. They were on TV in local newspapers. Like, it was just an amazing thing for them to accomplish. And of course, the teacher, being not just humble, but amazing, is in the background. It's not her story, it's theirs. And she's sitting back and watching this happen, and it's beautiful. And so she felt compelled to share it with us, which is why I'm sharing it with you. But these were two motivated, engaged students. And they were able to put technology to use to engage 400 other students towards a very specific learning objective, something that was real. And now, before, they were part of the robotics club. They were probably the only two girls in the robotics club. There were just a few kids in there. And they're part of this garbage picking thing that they were being made fun of. Now, after this event, there is a waiting list to pick garbage. And there is a waiting list for the robotics club. And they were able to completely change the engagement of their whole 5th grade in the Bronx. And it's an incredible story for them. It's just such a beautiful story. We really love to share that. So while I don't believe technology alone is what engages students, I like to ask teachers this question that Dave Burgess likes to ask. And he's I'll call him an ed tech guy, but he's not really an ed tech guy. He's an education evangelist. And he talks about engagement to say, if the kids that are in your class didn't have to be there, would they be? Would you be teaching to an empty room? And I like to challenge teachers to say, if you're negative on technology, at least consider that it might improve engagement. And it's not something you want to just throw at your class or throw at you, but use it when you can engage the class in learning towards some learning objective. Thank you.